Hey friends, tonight we're diving into something a little darker. Why punishments in the ancient world were so unbelievably cruel. Before we get started, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy winding down with these late-night history journeys. And if you feel like sharing, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to picture this little community scattered across time zones, all tuning in together. So, imagine yourself not a high priest, not a pharaoh, not even a king. You're just an ordinary person in an ordinary ancient world trying to survive day to day. But here's the catch. In your time, survival doesn't just depend on food, water, and shelter. It depends on something far more unpredictable: justice, or rather, punishment. Because in the ancient world, punishments weren't designed to be fair. They were designed to be cruel, and that's where our journey begins tonight. Why ancient punishments were so cruel. Long before the rise of kingdoms and empires, before the first bricks were laid in cities, humanity lived in small, fragile communities. Families gathered around firelight. Hunters returned with food from the forests. Farmers tilled the soil by hand, hoping the rains would come. In such small circles, disputes were unavoidable. Someone would take more than their share of food. Someone would break a promise or injure another in anger. And when there was no justice, the wound spread, arguments became quarrels, quarrels became feuds, feuds became violence that could tear the group apart. To survive, early people needed rules, and rules, to matter, needed consequences. Punishment was not invented out of cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was born of necessity, of the need to keep fragile societies intact. But once born, punishment grew sharp edges. It became public, visible, and often harsh. It was not enough to correct the wrongdoer. The punishment had to warn the rest of the community. The harsher the punishment, the louder the warning. And so, cruelty was written into the earliest codes of law. Let us drift now to the lands between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, the cradle of civilization. Here, nearly 4,000 years ago, in the bustling city of Babylon, a king named Hammurabi sought to bind his people under a single vision of law. The Code of Hammurabi, inscribed on a tall black stone, listed hundreds of laws and their punishments. This was no mere suggestion or guide. It was meant to be final, visible, and eternal. A monument to justice that could not be argued with. And when we read these laws today, we see their cruelty laid bare. If a man destroys the eye of another man, they shall destroy his eye. If he breaks another's bone, they shall break his bone. If a builder constructs a house and it collapses, killing the owner, the builder shall be put to death. The principle was simple and chilling, balance through suffering, order through pain. The Babylonians believed that if punishment was swift, visible, and exact, society would remain stable. it was not enough to repay the victim. The community itself had to see justice carved into flesh and bone, so that fear would preserve harmony. And though the punishments were cruel, they were also predictable. The code promised consistency. A thief knew what fate awaited him. A corrupt official could not claim ignorance. In a way, the very harshness of the law created a strange kind of fairness. One rule for all, written in stone. For a society always teetering on the edge of famine, invasion, and rebellion, certainty was worth the cost of cruelty. Picture, if you will, the dusty streets of Babylon on a hot afternoon. Merchants call out from stores. Children chase each other through narrow alleys. A crowd begins to gather in the square, for a trial is about to begin. A man has been accused of theft. He is brought before the elders, his hands trembling. The accusation is read aloud, and witnesses speak in hushed tone. The verdict is swift. The punishment will be carried out here, in front of neighbors and strangers alike. The crowd does not cheer. They do not laugh. They simply watch, silently, as the punishment is delivered. For each of them, the lesson is the same. The law is unyielding, and no one may escape its reach. And when they return to their homes, when they see the inscription of Hammurabi's laws etched into stone, the memory of cruelty becomes part of their daily lives. Farther west, along the eternal Nile, another civilization tied punishment to something even greater than law. The Egyptians believed in Ma'at, the sacred balance of truth, harmony, and order. To commit a crime was not simply to harm another person, it was to disturb the very balance of the universe. And so, punishment had cosmic weight. A thief might lose a hand. A conspirator against the pharaoh might be executed. Those who desecrated tombs, stealing treasures meant for eternity, could expect no mercy. In a land where death and the afterlife were central, to rob a grave was not just a crime against the living, but against the dead and the gods themselves. And yet, Egyptian justice was not only cruelty. Minor disputes could be resolved through restitution or solemn oaths. The scribes recorded cases of neighbors settling arguments over land or debt without bloodshed. But when the crime touched upon the sacred balance, forgiveness was rare. In grand halls lit by flickering oil lamps, judges sat beneath painted ceilings, weighing cases as heavily as priests weighed hearts in the afterlife. Each sentence carried not just authority, but the burden of eternity. To us, these punishments may seem merciless, but to the people of Mesopotamia and Egypt, they were tools of survival. Imagine, for a moment, living in those ancient worlds. The harvest could fail without warning. Foreign armies could appear at the edge of the horizon. Disease could sweep through streets and fields alike. Life was fragile, uncertain, and brief. And so, rulers leaned on fear. Fear was the glue that held societies together. Fear was the silent guard at every market, every temple, every home. Cruel punishments reminded everyone that order mattered more than mercy. That one person's pain was a small price to keep the community intact. But history is not only laws and kings. it is also people. Picture the faces of those who stood in the crowd during a punishment. The mother who clutched her child tighter, whispering that they must never stray from the path of honesty. The neighbor who wondered if hunger might one day drive him to the same crime. The scribe recording each judgment, his hand steady even as his heart trembled. In every punishment, there was not only the condemned, but the watchers, and in the memories of the watchers, cruelty left its deepest mark. As we pause here, at the threshold of history, let us reflect. The Babylonians carved their laws into stone, making cruelty eternal. The Egyptians tied punishment to the cosmos itself, binding crime to the balance of Ma'at. Together, they show us that cruelty in punishment was not random. It was deliberate, ritual, and believed to be necessary. A way to preserve fragile societies against the chaos that always lurked just beyond the city walls. And so, ancient punishments were cruel, not because humans were heartless, but because survival seemed to demand it. Tonight, we have walked through the origins of justice. We have seen how fear and balance shaped punishment in Mesopotamia and Egypt. But the story does not end here. Beyond the desert and the rivers, across the Aegean seas, another civilization was rising. One that would bring philosophy into the conversation of justice, one that would invent exile and public humiliation, one that would explore the meaning of punishment not only through fear, but through reason. That land was Greece, and in our next step together, we will wander through its city-states and listen to how punishment became both civic duty and philosophical debate. But for now, let your thoughts settle. Let the heavy stones of Babylon fade from your mind. Let the Nile drift quietly through your imagination. Close your eyes and rest. For history is long, and it waits patiently as the sun sets over the ancient world of Mesopotamia and Egypt. We drift westward across the Mediterranean Sea. The waves lap gently against wooden ships. The sky turns shades of soft orange and purple, and on the distant horizon, the land of Greece emerges a world of philosophers, city-states, and new visions of justice. Here, punishment was not only a matter of survival or divine balance. It became tied to the very identity of the city, the community, and the individual's role within it. Cruelty still existed, of course, but in Greece it often took on a different face, one that valued shame, exile, and public judgment as much as physical pain. Unlike the centralized kingdoms of Egypt and Mesopotamia, Greece was a patchwork of city-states: Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes. Each had its own government, its own customs, and its own approach to justice. But one idea united them. To be a citizen was both a privilege and a duty, and to break the laws of the city was not just to harm another person, but to betray the community itself. Punishment, therefore, became not only a deterrent, but a mirror. It reflected how each city defined itself and what it most feared losing. In Athens, the birthplace of democracy, punishments were often designed to protect the fragile balance of power among citizens. Here, one of the most unusual penalties was ostracism. Once a year, Athenians could gather and vote to exile a fellow citizen not for a crime, but for being too powerful, too ambitious, or too threatening to the harmony of the city. The votes were written on broken pieces of pottery called ostraca. If enough votes were cast against someone, that person was banished for 10 years. No trial, no defense, no appeal. Simply removed from the community, cut off from the life of the city. To us, exile might seem lighter than torture or execution, but in a world where identity and belonging were tied to the city, it was devastating. To be exiled was to be erased, to live as a ghost outside the place that gave you meaning. Other punishments in Athens included fines, loss of citizenship, and at times, execution. But the cruelty of Athenian justice often lay in its social weight, in humiliation, shame, and exclusion. In Sparta, by contrast, justice was forged in the fire of discipline. Spartans believed that weakness was the greatest crime of all. From childhood, boys were taken from their families and placed into the agoge, a harsh system of training that demanded obedience, endurance, and strength. Punishments here were not limited to lawbreakers. They were part of everyday life. A child who faltered in training might be whipped before his peers. A soldier who showed cowardice in battle could be shamed, excluded, or stripped of his rights. To fail in courage was to fail in honor, and punishment was swift and merciless. Cruelty in Sparta was not only legal, it was cultural. It was a constant reminder that survival depended on strength and that weakness had no place in their society. One of the striking features of Greek punishment was its public nature. Trials were held in open spaces, where citizens gathered to listen, debate, and decide. Punishments were carried out before the community, ensuring that shame and memory linger. For Athenians, words themselves could wound. A poet or philosopher could be fined, exiled, or even executed for what they said, if their speech was deemed harmful to the city. The trial of Socrates is the most famous example. Accused of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods, Socrates stood before the jury not as a criminal, but as a thinker whose ideas unsettled those in power. The punishment chosen was death by hemlock, and so, with calm acceptance, Socrates drank the poison, his execution becoming one of history's most remembered moments of philosophical defiance. Here, we see that cruelty in Greece was not always in the body's suffering, but in the stripping away of voice, honor, and belonging. It is impossible to speak of Greece without speaking of its philosophers, who wrestled with the meaning of justice itself. Plato imagined a world where laws reflected the greater good and where punishment was meant to correct, not only to harm. Aristotle, in his writings, saw justice as balance not unlike Hammurabi, but tempered by reason and virtue. To them, punishment could be cruel, but it was also a teacher. Through it, the community learned what was valued, what was despised, and what was sacred. And so, even as punishments could be harsh, philosophy softened the edges, offering questions where once there had only been commands. Let us pause to imagine the scene of an Athenian trial. The agora, the central marketplace, is filled with people. A citizen accused of wrongdoing stands before a jury of his peers. No judges in robes, no lawyers with rehearsed speeches, only the voices of ordinary men speaking for and against the accused. The crowd listens, murmuring, debating. The air is alive with words. And when the votes are cast, the punishment is declared. Perhaps a fine, perhaps exile, perhaps death. The cruelty here lies not in the lash or the blade, but in the power of the community to decide the fate of one of its own. To be condemned by one's neighbors is a wound that cuts deeply, even before the sentence is carried out. We must also remember that Greek justice, like that of Babylon and Egypt, was built upon inequality. Citizens enjoyed rights, but slaves and foreigners did not. For them, punishments could be far harsher. A citizen might pay a fine for a crime, while a slave could be whipped, branded, or executed for the same offense. Foreigners could be expelled or enslaved with little ceremony. Cruelty, in this sense, was a dividing line separating those who belonged from those who did not. It reinforced the boundaries of the city, making citizenship itself the most precious possession of all. And so, in Greece, punishment took on many forms: exile, humiliation, execution, discipline, and exclusion. It was not always the brutality of the body that struck hardest, but the cruelty of being cast out, silenced, or shamed before one's peers. In this, we see a new layer to the story of human justice. Cruelty could be physical, as it was in Babylon. It could be cosmic, as it was in Egypt. But in Greece, cruelty could also be social cutting, not flesh, but identity itself. As we leave Greece behind, we drift once more across the seas. Beyond the horizon lies a rising power, one that will take the lessons of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Greece and shape them into something vast, complex, and terrifying. Rome, a republic, and later an empire, where law was both refined and brutal, where punishments were not only about justice, but about spectacle, where cruelty itself became entertainment. And so, as we prepare to step into the shadow of the Roman Colosseum, we carry with us the lessons of Greece, the philosophy of justice, the cruelty of exile, and the belief that punishment is both a warning and a mirror. The world shifts once more, and we find ourselves in Rome, not in the quiet hush of a philosopher's study, but in a city alive with voices, footsteps, and the echoes of power. Rome, unlike the civilizations before it, wove punishment into a grand stage. Here, justice was not simply handed down. It was performed, displayed, and made into a lesson for all who looked on. Imagine, if you will, walking along the cobblestones of the Roman Forum. Columns rise above you, their marble glowing softly in the Mediterranean sun. Merchants call out in busy markets, citizens in white togas move in clusters, while soldiers stand sentinel at the edges of the square. In the heart of this bustling world, justice was always visible. The punishment of one was the warning to many. Rome believed deeply in the idea of order, disciplina, the strict discipline that kept a vast empire together. And to maintain that order, they turned to punishment that was both severe and unforgettable. One of the most striking aspects of Roman justice was its theatrical nature. The Colosseum itself, that great arena of stone and shadow, was not built only for games of sport or displays of courage. It was also a place where punishment became spectacle. Criminals might be let out onto the sandy floor. The crowd hushed, and then they would face wild beasts or staged battles in which survival was nearly impossible. It was punishment, yes, but it was also entertainment, a way for Roman citizens to feel both the thrill of danger and the comfort of control. For they were reminded with every scream and clash that the empire's laws were powerful, unyielding, and absolute. To our modern minds, such cruelty might feel unthinkable. But to the Romans, it was logic woven with ritual. Punishment was never only about the offender. It was about the community watching, absorbing the lesson, and carrying that fear into their daily lives. The Roman military, too, developed punishments that were as symbolic as they were harsh. Consider the practice of decimation. When a legion showed cowardice in battle or disobedience against orders, commanders would not punish only the guilty. Instead, they punished 1 in 10 men chosen by lot. The unlucky soldier was beaten to death by his own comrades, while the rest of the unit stood witness. It was a punishment not meant to fit a single crime, but to remind an entire legion that Rome demanded courage, unity, and obedience above all else. The cruelty here served a purpose: to bind men together through fear, to fuse loyalty not through kindness, but through the shared knowledge that failure carried unbearable cost. Roman law, of course, extended beyond the battlefield. The famous 12 tables, etched in bronze and displayed in public spaces, laid out punishments in clear and deliberate words. For theft, for injury, for dishonor. Each crime carried a penalty. Sometimes it was monetary, but often it was physical. A thief caught in the act might be whipped or even enslaved. Someone guilty of treason could be executed in ways designed to erase their honor entirely, their names cursed, their property seized. And then there was crucifixion. Perhaps Rome's most infamous punishment. It was slow, it was agonizing, and it was meant to be seen. Victims were nailed or tied to wooden crosses, raised high above roadsides or city entrances, their suffering stretched out over hours or days. It was not merely death. It was a warning written in human flesh, a message to anyone passing by. This is what happened to those who defy the might of Rome. Yet, even in its severity, Roman punishment reveals something important about the culture itself. It was never cruelty for cruelty's sake, at least not in the eyes of the empire. Instead, punishment was woven into the social fabric. It reinforced hierarchy. It reminded citizens of their roles. It displayed the empire's strength. And above all, it turned law into a shared performance, a spectacle witnessed by all, remembered by all, and feared by all. Imagine now walking away from the forum. The day grows long, shadows stretch across marble streets, and the glow of torchlight begins to flicker somewhere in the distance. The Colosseum stands tall, its arches glowing like hollow eyes in the night. You know that tomorrow, or the next day, another punishment will unfold there. Another story of Rome's justice will be written in sweat, in blood, and in silence. As we drift further into this memory, let us not focus on the horror, but on the stillness that followed. The Colosseum empties, the soldiers march away, the city returns to quiet, and for a moment, you stand alone in ancient Rome, listening not to the cries of punishment, but to the soft hum of wind moving through arches of stone. The empire sleeps, and so shall you. As the Mediterranean fades behind us, we drift eastward across mountains, deserts, and rivers until we reach the vast lands of ancient China. Here, civilization blossomed along the Yellow River. The landscape is dotted with quiet villages, terraced fields, and slow-moving boats on calm waterways. The air smells of earth and growing grain, and the sound of wind in bamboo forests carries a calm rhythm that soothes the mind. In this world, punishment took on a different character. Unlike Rome, where cruelty often became spectacle, and unlike Greece, where social shame weighed heavily, China combined law with philosophy, ritual, and moral order. Punishments were designed to maintain harmony, to correct behavior, and to reinforce the authority of the state. China's earliest dynasties, Xia, Shang, and Zhou, already recorded severe punishment. Offenses such as theft, murder, and rebellion were met with penalties that could include fines, forced labor, mutilation, or execution. But what is striking is how these punishments were intertwined with moral philosophy. Confucian thought, emerging during the later Zhou dynasty, emphasized ethics, hierarchy, and the cultivation of virtue. Crime was seen not only as a violation of law, but as a disruption of social and cosmic harmony. The goal of punishment, therefore, was often dual: to correct the offender and to teach the community what behavior upheld order. Even in harsh penalties, there was intention behind the act. The state sought balance, not chaos. Like other civilizations, ancient China could be ruthless. Some punishments were physical and terrifying: amputation of the nose or foot, branding, or even execution. These acts were intended to mark the offender permanently, to remind all who saw them of the consequences of violating law and order. Public punishment was also a tool for deterrence. Villagers would witness the execution of criminals in marketplaces or city squares. The crowd learned through observation, and yet there was care in the ritual. Punishments were formal, structured, and tied to the moral codes of the time. Unlike Rome's bloody spectacles, Chinese punishment often carried a quiet, ceremonial weight. The intent was to impress moral order upon the observer, not merely to entertain. During the Warring States period, a philosophy known as legalism arose. Legalists argued that humans were inherently selfish and required strict laws to maintain order. This belief justified some of the harshest punishments in Chinese history. Emperors such as Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China, implemented legalist policies on a massive scale. Laws were written in precise, detailed codes. Punishments were swift and severe. Crimes like theft, desertion, or insubordination could result in execution, mutilation, or forced labor on imperial projects. One famous form of punishment was lynching, or death by 1,000 cuts. Though gruesome, it was rare and usually reserved for the most serious crimes, such as treason. The purpose was not only retribution, but also a stark warning to others. Disloyalty or rebellion would not be tolerated. Yet, alongside legalism, Confucian ideals softened the harsh edges of punishment. Confucius taught that virtue and moral education were as important as law. A ruler's role was to guide the people, not only to punish them. In this system, correction through moral instruction became a central part of justice. Imagine a magistrate in a quiet provincial town. He listens patiently to the complaints of citizens, mediates disputes over land or property, and determines penalties that combine law with instruction. A criminal may be fined or sent to work for the community, while being reminded of the moral principles they have violated. Punishment, in this sense, was a lesson wrapped in consequence, designed to restore harmony rather than simply to instill fear. In ancient China, as in Greece, social standing played a role in punishment. Families shared both honor and shame. If one member of a household committed a crime, their relatives might also suffer consequences, including fines or labor obligation. This system reinforced responsibility and collective morality. The fear of bringing shame upon one's family was often enough to encourage good behavior. Cruelty, therefore, became subtle. It was woven into reputation, community standing, and moral expectation. Not all punishments were bloody or overt. Stocks, shackles, and public censure served as quiet reminders of law. A thief might be displayed in the village square, not beaten mercilessly, but bound and exposed, allowing the community to witness the outcome of their crime. Even for executions, ceremonies were often formal, quiet, and measured. The act was precise, almost ritualistic. It was not meant to shock the masses with gore, but to impress order and authority upon them. In this, Chinese punishments combined deterrence with moral teaching in a uniquely calm and controlled manner. Another form of punishment was forced labor, which combined practical utility with moral correction. Criminals were assigned to work on irrigation projects, roads, or temples. This served the state and also instilled discipline, endurance, and reflection. Even harsh labor carried lessons. The offender's body and mind were both engaged in repair of their own behavior and repair of the community's needs. The goal was balance, restoration, and the reinforcement of the social order. In comparing China to Rome or Greece, one notices a contrast. Roman cruelty was spectacle. Greek cruelty was often social and psychological. Chinese cruelty, at its harshest, was methodical, controlled, and tied to philosophy. The purpose was always order. The aim was to maintain harmony. Even when punishments were severe, they were part of a system, a vision of justice that linked morality, family, society, and state. And as you imagine the quiet rivers, bamboo forests, and terraced fields, notice the calmness in the execution of law. It is not the chaos of an arena or the crowd's whisper of shame, but a measured, deliberate response to imbalance. Tonight, we have drifted far from Mesopotamia and Egypt, across Greece and Rome, and now into the vast, disciplined lands of China. In this gentle journey, we have seen how punishment reflects the values of society. Balance and survival in Mesopotamia, divine order in Egypt, civic duty and philosophical reflection in Greece, spectacle and control in Rome, harmony and moral instruction in China. Each culture had its own rhythm, its own way of blending fear, cruelty, and guidance. And as we prepare to drift further, we will eventually explore the civilizations of India, the laws of kings, and the moral weight of Dharma, and the stories of justice, punishment, and cruelty that shaped lives in the East and South. For now, let the soft winds of China's rivers carry you deeper into rest. Feel the calm of terraced fields at dusk. Hear the quiet rustle of bamboo in the evening air, and drift with the understanding that punishment in every time and place is as much a mirror of culture as it is a measure of justice. As we drift further east and west, our journey carries us to the lands of the Indian subcontinent and the fertile crescent of the Middle East. Imagine vast rivers, golden fields, and ancient cities where life moves at the rhythm of water, sun, and stone. In these regions, punishment was intertwined with the moral and spiritual order of life. It was never merely an act of authority, it was a reflection of duty, belief, and cosmic balance. In India, the concept of Dharma guided not only personal behavior, but also the administration of law. Dharma represents duty, righteousness, and the proper order of society. To break Dharma was to disrupt harmony not just within a village, but in the universe itself. Punishments in this context were carefully linked to the severity of the offense, the status of the offender, and the intention behind the act. The early texts, including the Manusmriti, outline penalties ranging from fines and labor to corporal punishment. Imagine a small village on the banks of the Ganges, farmers tilling fields, children playing by the river, and the local council quietly deliberating a dispute. A man has taken more than his share of grain. A woman has broken a household rule. The resolution is measured, deliberate, intended to restore balance, not merely inflict pain. Punishments were also tied to education and rehabilitation. Offenders might be required to perform community service, make restitution, or engage in ritual penance. Even when corporal punishment was applied, it was done in a regulated, almost ritualistic manner. During the Maurya Empire, around 321–185 BCE, law and punishment became more centralized. Emperor Ashoka, after his transformation toward Buddhism, emphasized justice tempered with compassion. Although harsh punishments existed, he also promoted rehabilitation, fair treatment, and moral education. The Gupta Empire, centuries later, continued this approach. Laws were codified and organized. Punishment was often proportionate and carefully measured. Public executions and corporal punishments occurred, but the underlying principle was always restoring social and moral order, not cruelty for its own sake. In both empires, punishment was thus a balance of fear, morality, and instruction. It was meant to correct behavior, guide the community, and maintain harmony in a complex and diverse society. Turning westward, we arrive in ancient Persia, where law and punishment were closely tied to kingship and divine authority. The Achaemenid kings, ruling from 550 BCE onward, saw themselves as chosen by Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of Zoroastrianism. Justice was therefore not only a civic duty, it was a sacred responsibility. Crimes against the king, the state, or the gods could be met with severe penalties. Execution, mutilation, and exile were tools to maintain order and demonstrate divine will. Yet punishment was also meant to reinforce morality, reflecting the cosmic struggle between truth and deceit. Imagine a Persian city under the shadow of a grand palace. Soldiers standing guard, scribes recording the laws, and citizens walking carefully through the streets. To break a law was not just personal failure, it was a disruption of divine order itself. In this context, cruelty served as both deterrent and moral instruction. Further west, in the land of ancient Israel, punishment was deeply intertwined with religious law. The Torah, the sacred text, outlines laws that governed every aspect of life: social behavior, commerce, property, and worship. Punishments were varied: fines, restitution, corporal punishment, and in extreme cases, execution. The guiding principle was often justice as obedience to God. Crime disrupted not only human society, but the covenant between God and his people. For example, theft required restitution, sometimes multiplied several times over. Murder demanded proportional punishment, and certain transgressions, such as idolatry, could result in capital punishment. In these societies, punishment served multiple purposes: to restore balance, to teach obedience, and to reinforce faith. It was deeply moral, rooted in a worldview where law and religion were inseparable. Picture a quiet village in ancient Israel, olive groves swaying gently in the wind, families tending their fields, and a council of elders meeting in shaded courtyards. Here, justice is deliberate, communal, and moral. Punishment is applied not merely to instill fear, but to preserve harmony with God and among people. As we drift across India, Persia, and Israel, we notice patterns and contrasts. In India, punishment was bound to dharma, moral order, and cosmic balance. In Persia, law reflected divine kingship and the authority of the gods. In Israel, punishment was inseparable from covenant and faith, emphasizing moral obedience. In all cases, cruelty was present, but it was never arbitrary. It was structured, ritualized, and deeply connected to the culture, beliefs, and needs of each society. Even the harshest penalties, amputation, exile, or execution, were part of a broader framework designed to maintain order, educate, and preserve the social fabric. Let your mind drift now over these lands, the calm waters of the Ganges, reflecting the soft light of early morning, the grand palaces of Persia, their walls quiet beneath the golden sunset, olive groves in Israel, rustling gently in the evening breeze. In each place, punishment has left its mark on history, but the landscapes themselves remain peaceful. They whisper the stories of justice and cruelty softly, allowing us to observe, reflect, and learn. Even as the punishments of ancient India and the Middle East might feel severe, their purpose was always to guide, restore, and maintain harmony. They were shaped by culture, belief, and the understanding of human nature. And as the sun dips below the horizon in these distant lands, we prepare to continue our journey into the civilizations of ancient Europe, Africa, and the Mediterranean, where law, punishment, and morality will continue to intertwine in new and fascinating ways. For now, let your thoughts settle. Let the images of rivers, deserts, and groves fade softly into calm and drift with the gentle rhythm of history. As the echoes of Persia, India, and Israel fade behind us, we drift once more across the Mediterranean toward the western lands where Rome's great empire slowly wanes. Imagine the streets of Rome, once vibrant with trade, politics, and the clatter of soldiers' boots. Now, some are quiet, others still bustling with the daily life of citizens, but the air carries the tension of uncertainty. The empire that once held the known world together begins to fracture, and with its decline, the administration of justice changes profoundly. Where once law was centralized, codified, and disciplined, now local leaders, provincial governors, and invading peoples feel the vacuum. The stability of centuries gives way to new systems of justice, sometimes crude, sometimes surprisingly fair, but always influenced by the needs and fears of the time. By the 4th and 5th century CE, Rome faces both internal strife and external invasion. The Visigoths, Vandals, Ostrogoths, and other tribes move across the empire's borders. They bring their own customs, blending Roman law with tribal traditions. In these Germanic societies, justice is often personal and immediate. The idea of a centralized, codified legal system is less important than maintaining honor, protecting families, and exacting retribution when wronged. This leads to blood feuds, long-standing cycles of revenge, where a single act of harm can echo across generations. Yet, these tribes also develop systems to reduce endless violence. Wergild, or man price, allows compensation to replace revenge killings. If a man is injured or killed, the offender or their family pays a fixed sum to the victim's family. The payment is calculated by the social status of the person harmed, their role in the community, and the severity of the crime. While this might seem cruel by modern standards, assigning a monetary value to human life, it reflects an early effort to balance justice with practicality. It prevents the complete collapse of community life, even as it acknowledges the deep wounds inflicted by wrongdoing. As Rome fades, new forms of legal practice emerge in the early medieval period. In small villages and nascent towns, law, religion, and superstition begin to intertwine. Trials are no longer conducted solely by judges or assemblies. Instead, the outcome of guilt is sometimes left to the forces of nature or to divine judgment. This period gives rise to trials by ordeal. Fire. A hand might be placed in flames, or a red-hot iron carried a certain distance. Healing without infection was seen as proof of innocence. Water. Accused persons might be thrown into a river or pond. Floating was interpreted as guilt, sinking as innocence. These methods may appear arbitrary or cruel to us, yet in the context of the time, they reflected a society seeking guidance from God when human judgment was uncertain. Clergy often oversaw these trials, linking punishment and justice to religious authority. Superstition, ritual, and fear mingle with morality and law, creating a system where cruelty is codified but also sanctioned by belief. In early Europe, the sacred and the secular are inseparable. Kings rule by divine right, their decrees infused with moral weight. Punishments are administered not only to correct behavior, but to demonstrate spiritual order. Imagine a small village in the early Middle Ages. The church's bells ring softly in the distance, peasants tend their fields, and the local lord or magistrate convenes a trial in the shaded square. Accusations are read aloud, witnesses speak carefully, and the clergy may interpret signs or perform rituals to determine guilt. Even in harsh penalties, whippings, stocks, public humiliation, there is structure, ritual, and meaning. The community observes, learns, and participates. Punishment becomes a tool of moral instruction as much as law enforcement. This merging of law, religion, and superstition lays the groundwork for medieval justice. It is a period of transition where cruelty becomes public, ceremonial, and deeply intertwined with belief. Returning to the Germanic tribes, it's important to reflect on the persistence of personal justice. Blood feuds, though potentially destructive, were governed by strict social codes. Each offense required careful calculation, the wergild amount, the negotiation between families, the acknowledgement of wrongdoing. These customs emphasize the social dimension of punishment. The goal is not only to punish the offender, but to preserve harmony within the tribe, to prevent cycles of violence from spiraling out of control. Even as cruelty, physical pain, exile, or execution remains present, it is framed within rules that aim to balance society. This reflects a subtle evolution from the spectacle and immediacy of Roman punishment toward a system that blends retribution with community responsibility. As towns grow and local authorities gain influence, punishments become more public and ritualized. Stocks and pillories display wrongdoers before the community. Fines, labor, or corporal punishment are meted out according to the offender's social status. Crimes such as theft, blasphemy, or assault are punished not only to correct behavior, but to reinforce societal hierarchy. Even in this early medieval period, one notices the careful choreography of cruelty, ritualized, structured, and visible. Pain and shame are tools, but they are always linked to social order and moral instruction. In these years, we see the seeds of cruelty as performance taking root. The Roman arenas may fade, but the spectacle of punishment continues in villages, towns, and later courts. Public execution, ritualized torture, and communal trials are early forms of what will become a defining feature of medieval justice. Imagine a quiet town square. The sun is low, casting long shadows on cobblestone streets. A thief is placed in the stocks. The townspeople watch quietly. Children glance curiously, and the lesson is absorbed without a word. The act is not only punishment, it is instruction, a reminder of law, morality, and community expectations. Tonight, we have traveled through the decline of Rome and the early medieval period. We have seen how barbarian laws mix vengeance with compensation, the role of blood feuds and wergild in maintaining balance, the intertwining of law, religion, and superstition in early towns, the origins of trials by ordeal, public punishment, and moral instruction. As you imagine these early European towns, feel the calm that follows the ceremony of justice. See the long streets emptying at dusk, hear the soft murmur of villagers returning home, and notice how even in cruelty, order and community persist. And as the night deepens, we know that tomorrow, or in the next part of our journey, cruelty will evolve once more, entering the high Middle Ages, where spectacle and ritual will dominate the courts and the dance of law, fear, and morality continues. As the echoes of early European towns fade behind us, we drift deeper into the medieval world. The sun sets slowly over walled cities, casting long shadows across cobbled streets. Life moves at a measured pace, but beneath the quiet rhythm lies a profound awareness of order, law, and consequence. Medieval Europe was a land where justice and faith intertwined, where punishment became both a practical tool and a performance for the community to witness. Cruelty, ritualized and structured, was woven into daily life, and yet there was purpose and intent not only to punish, but to teach, to deter, and to maintain the social and moral fabric. Public punishment was central to medieval justice. The stocks, pillories, and whipping posts stood in market squares, visible to all who passed by. A thief might be tied to a wooden frame, hands and feet secured, while townspeople observed quietly, absorbing the lesson of law and consequence. Executions, too, were public events. Hanging, beheading, and burning at the stake served as both final punishment and communal warning. The spectacle was deliberate. Crowds would gather, local authorities ensured order, and the moral weight of the act was reinforced through visibility. Yet, as unsettling as these images might feel, they were part of a larger social rhythm. Punishment was structured, almost ceremonial. The goal was not only the pain of the offender, but the reinforcement of communal norms, reminding every observer of the boundaries of acceptable behavior. The medieval period also saw the rise of church-led justice. Faith and law merged, and offenses against religious doctrine, heresy, blasphemy, or suspected witchcraft could carry severe consequences. Witch trials, particularly in the later Middle Ages, combined fear, superstition, and ritualized punishment. Accused individuals were often subjected to ordeals, interrogation, and public humiliation. Communities watched, learning what the church deemed acceptable and what it condemned. Heresy, too, was treated with extreme seriousness. The belief that the soul and by extension the community could be endangered drove punishment. Execution, imprisonment, or exile served as both correction and warning. The act of punishing heresy was a performance of faith as much as law, demonstrating the power of religious and secular authority combined. Fear was a subtle, pervasive tool. The knowledge that misbehavior could lead to public humiliation, whipping, or execution encouraged conformity. Communities internalized this fear, regulating behavior through social pressure as well as formal punishment. Yet even in these darker moments, there was a rhythm to medieval life. Markets, church services, Festivals and quiet homes continued alongside the formal rituals of justice. Punishment was part of the natural cycle of life, woven into the moral and social fabric, rather than being an external, arbitrary imposition. While spectacle was central, prisons also emerged as a form of punishment. Dungeons were dark, damp, and isolated. They were designed to restrain, to reflect on crime, and sometimes to extract confession. Prisoners might spend days, weeks, or months in solitude, their senses attuned to the flicker of torchlight, the distant sounds of footsteps, and the slow passage of time, marked only by the rise and fall of water, wind, or bell. Punishment by imprisonment was less about immediate physical pain and more about reflection, moral correction, and, at times, fear. The silence of the dungeon became its own teacher, an echoing reminder of consequences and the authority of the law. Imagine now the quiet of a medieval town at night, the market square empty, stocks and pillories abandoned until morning. A distant monastery bell tolls softly, and the faint murmur of the river carries through stone streets. Even as cruelty exists, it is contained within ritual, purpose, and structure. Punishment is a reminder of boundaries, morality, and community values. It is not random, but measured, deliberate, and meaningful within the context of belief and society. Medieval towns teach us something subtle, that cruelty, when combined with ritual, faith, and communal oversight, becomes more than punishment. It becomes a reflection of shared values, fears, and hopes. Yet, even as the cruelty of medieval Europe is structured and ritualized, it is not static. Time moves forward, empires rise and fall, and the philosophies, laws, and punishments of the past evolve. In the next part of our journey, we will explore the early modern period, where justice becomes increasingly codified, courts formalized, and punishment moves toward the ideas of deterrence, rehabilitation, and social order that hint at the modern world. For now, let the quiet of medieval streets settle into your mind. Hear the soft rustle of leaves, the distant toll of bells, and drift slowly with the rhythm of history, knowing that cruelty, law, and faith have long been intertwined in shaping human societies. As the echoes of medieval towns fade, we drift into the bustling streets and grand courts of Renaissance Europe. Sunlight glints off marble palaces and cobbled marketplaces, while banners flutter above the thoroughfares. This is a world of monarchs, empires, and absolute authority, where justice remains both a tool of order and a performance of power. During this period, punishment became highly formalized, yet simultaneously more spectacular. Kings and queens, emperors and nobles used law and cruelty as a way to assert authority. Public executions, ritualized torture, and visible penalties reminded their subjects that power was absolute and disobedience costly. Monarchs governed not only through legislation, but through the demonstration of their authority. Punishment was visible, ceremonial, and carefully orchestrated. Crimes such as theft, treason, heresy, or rebellion were met with swift and sometimes brutal consequences. The courts became centers of power as well as justice. Magistrates, advisors, and executioners acted as instruments of the ruler's will, ensuring that law reflected both order and hierarchy. The display of punishment reinforced social norms, instilled fear, and showcased the monarch's control over life and death. This era saw the invention and widespread use of torture devices, each designed to inflict both physical pain and moral demonstration. The rack stretched the body painfully, dislocating joints while compelling confession. The wheel left victims broken and displayed for days, a reminder of the cost of crime. Iron cages and stocks confined individuals for extended periods, their suffering witnessed by townspeople. These devices were not chaotic, they were ritualized. Executioners followed strict protocols, and the acts were carefully orchestrated to serve as a warning to the community. Pain was a lesson, cruelty a tool, and visibility the instrument of authority. Punishment in the Renaissance and early modern period was often theatrical, demonstrating the reach of kings, queens, and emperors. Public executions drew large crowds. Courts were adorned with banners, heralds announced the proceedings, and every act of justice became a lesson for those who observed. Yet, behind the spectacle was strategy. Visible cruelty reinforced hierarchy, deterred rebellion, and maintained social order. It reminded the populace that power was absolute and that the monarch's authority extended to every corner of life. Imagine the square outside a palace. Citizens gather, murmuring softly as a condemned noble is led forth. Executioners prepare their instruments with precise ritual. The crowd is silent, absorbing the lesson. Every motion, every tool, every act of punishment communicates authority, order, and consequence. Despite the grandeur of these rituals, the Renaissance also sparked reflection and debate. Philosophers, writers, and thinkers began questioning the necessity of cruelty. Figures such as Michel de Montaigne reflected on the human cost of punishment. Some argued that cruelty did not guarantee justice and that society might enforce law through reason, morality, and proportion rather than sheer terror. This intellectual awakening planted seeds for reform. Even as torture and public executions continued, criticism grew quietly, carried in manuscripts, salons, and private discussions among the learned. The tension between tradition and reform became a hallmark of the era. Kings and queens still wielded power through spectacle, but the idea that cruelty might be unnecessary began to take root in Europe's collective consciousness. The early modern period reminds us that punishment is never just about the offender. It communicates values, authority, and moral expectations to the community. Cruelty is a tool, a lesson, and a performance. Yet, within these displays, we notice the stirrings of empathy and reason. Even in the shadows of torture chambers and public squares, voices question whether justice requires such severity. This is a society on the cusp of transformation, a world where law remains visible, ritualized, and authoritative, but where philosophers begin to imagine alternatives. Picture now the quiet of a Renaissance evening. Torches flicker along palace walls. The soft murmur of fountains fills the courtyard, and the streets are slowly emptied of spectators. Even the instruments of punishment rest for the night. The rack, the wheel, and the iron cages are silent. The crowd disperses, and the square becomes calm once more. There is a rhythm here, a balance between order and reflection. The cruelty of the day is over, but its lessons linger in the minds of those who witnessed it. And in that quiet, there is room for thought, for imagination, for questioning, and for the possibility that justice might one day rely less on fear. The world was slowly awakening to the idea that cruelty need not rule justice. In the coming centuries, ideas of reform, proportionality, and rehabilitation will begin to reshape punishment. The philosophies of Enlightenment thinkers, the codification of law, and the move toward modern justice will gradually transform societies. For now, drift gently with the quiet streets, the fading torches, and the soft murmur of a world beginning to reflect on its own actions. As the flickering torches of the Renaissance fade behind us, we drift into a world bathed in candlelight, lanterns, and the soft glow of study rooms filled with books. This is the age of reason, the Enlightenment, where thinkers, philosophers, and reformers begin to question the age-old traditions of punishment. No longer is cruelty simply accepted as a tool of authority. Instead, law becomes a subject of reflection, discussion, and careful reasoning. Across Europe, from Paris to London, from Berlin to Vienna, the ideas of justice, proportion, and human dignity start to take shape. In this period, several thinkers revolutionize how society views punishment. Cesare Beccaria, in Italy, writes with calm clarity, arguing that the purpose of punishment should be prevention, not revenge. He observes the brutality of public executions, torture, and arbitrary penalties, and proposes that punishments be proportionate, swift, and certain, but free from excessive cruelty. Voltaire, Montesquieu, and other intellectuals echo similar sentiments. They critique arbitrary law and the spectacle of pain, arguing that human reason and moral conscience should guide the administration of justice. Picture a quiet study in Paris. A philosopher pens his thoughts by candlelight, the flicker of the flame reflecting off leather-bound books, and the faint sound of distant bells marking the passing hours. Here, ideas take form that will one day reshape the very foundations of law Enlightenment ideals lead to tangible reforms across Europe. Torture is gradually reduced or abolished in many regions. Public executions, once theatrical events, are increasingly questioned for their moral and social value. Instead, the focus shifts toward rehabilitation, proportion, and deterrence. Prisons are redesigned to house offenders in humane conditions, allowing reflection, education, and moral reform. The penal system begins to emphasize reason over spectacle, instruction over terror. Even monarchies and empires take notice. Kings and queens implement codified legal systems that reflect rational principles. Punishment becomes a tool to maintain social order, but without the excessive cruelty that defined earlier centuries. This is the period where modern justice is born. Laws are written, standardized, and made accessible to the public. Judges interpret them with guidance from reason and philosophy, rather than tradition alone. Punishment becomes proportionate to the crime. Executions are reserved for the gravest offenses. Fines, labor, and imprisonment replace the ritualized spectacles of the past. The goal is no longer to frighten the populace into obedience, but to prevent wrongdoing while preserving dignity. Imagine a courtroom in Vienna or London. A judge speaks clearly, the accused listens attentively, and the community observes the proceedings in quiet order. Here, justice is measured, rational, and calm. A far cry from the public spectacles of the medieval or early modern periods. Enlightenment thinkers also introduced the concept that human beings have inherent rights. Punishment must respect these rights, even while enforcing the law. The idea that cruelty is unnecessary, harmful, and morally objectionable gains traction. Philosophers argue that fear alone is insufficient to maintain order. Instead, justice should rely on reason, law, and ethical principles. Communities begin to adopt legal systems that prioritize fairness, proportionality, and the possibility of reform. The world slowly awakens to the understanding that society can maintain order without resorting to barbaric cruelty, spectacle, or superstition. One of the most important reforms of this era is the reorganization of prisons. Rather than serving primarily as places of punishment or torture, prisons become spaces for reflection and rehabilitation. Inmates are housed in cells designed to allow introspection, education, and moral correction. Daily routines are organized, work and study are encouraged, and the focus shifts from pain to moral growth. Even solitary confinement, once used as a form of torment, is reconsidered. It becomes a tool for self-reflection rather than indiscriminate suffering. Punishment, now guided by reason and philosophy, slowly evolves into a measured, humane system. Imagine the quiet streets of an Enlightenment-era town. Gas lamps flicker softly. Scholars walk silently along cobblestone avenues, and distant church bells toll the passing hours. The instruments of cruelty, racks, wheels, iron cages, are gradually disappearing, stored away or abandoned. The public square, once a stage for fear and spectacle, now hums with calm, orderly life. Even as injustice still exists, the principles of reason, proportion, and human dignity begin to shape the world. Punishment becomes measured, structured, and reflective, a mirror of society's evolving understanding of morality, law, and fairness. And so, as the 18th century unfolds, the foundations of modern justice take hold. Cruelty is no longer the defining feature of punishment. Reason, human dignity, and moral philosophy begin to guide law. In the final part of our journey, we will drift into the modern era where law, society, and punishment continue to evolve. We will reflect on how history has shaped our understanding of justice and how cruelty, once so central to human societies, has been tempered over centuries. For now, let the calm streets, quiet lamps, and gentle rhythm of reason carry you slowly into rest as the world awakens to the idea that cruelty need not rule justice. As the candlelight of the Enlightenment fades into the gentle glow of the modern era, we drift into a world where law, society, and punishment are guided less by spectacle, fear, or superstition, and more by reason, fairness, and the understanding of human dignity. The streets are quieter now, not because crime has vanished, but because justice has evolved. Courts, judges, and prisons reflect centuries of observation, thought, and reform. History has taught humanity that cruelty need not be central to maintaining order, and that punishment can serve as guidance, correction, and moral instruction rather than terror. By the 19th and 20th centuries, legal systems across the world began to codify the principles that philosophers and reformers had advocated for centuries. Laws are written clearly and accessible to the public. Punishments are proportionate to crimes. Trials are conducted fairly, with representation, evidence, and reasoned judgment. Physical cruelty, once a staple of justice, is largely removed from the system. Executions, when they occur, are conducted privately and rarely used for minor offenses. Imprisonment replaces public spectacle, focusing on rehabilitation rather than public shame. Prisons are redesigned to reflect these ideals. Brightened cells, structured routines, and opportunities for work, education, and reflection. Inmates are no longer solely subjects of punishment, but participants in a system aimed at moral and social correction. Modern justice is intertwined with the recognition of human rights. Every individual is understood to possess inherent dignity and moral worth. Even those who violate the law are entitled to fair treatment, humane conditions, and the possibility of redemption. International treaties, constitutions, and legal standards reflect this commitment. Torture, arbitrary punishment, and cruel treatment are universally condemned, a testament to humanity's slow, centuries-long journey toward compassion and fairness. Imagine a modern courtroom. Sunlight filters through tall windows. The quiet murmur of voices fills the room as evidence is presented, and a judge speaks clearly and calmly, ensuring that justice is administered with reason, fairness, and impartiality. Even as society faces challenges, the lessons of history guide each decision. That punishment should educate, protect, and restore, rather than terrify or degrade. History teaches us that cruelty is not necessary for justice. From the harsh punishments of ancient Rome and medieval Europe to the ritualized cruelty of Renaissance courts, societies once believed that fear and spectacle were essential tools. Yet, as we have seen, humanity has repeatedly found alternatives. Laws rooted in morality and reason, as in ancient India and Persia. Compensation and social balance, as in Germanic war guild. Reflection, rehabilitation, and education, as in Enlightenment reforms. By studying these past systems, we understand the value of proportion, fairness, and human dignity. We learn that justice can enforce order without inflicting unnecessary suffering, and that societies thrive when punishment is guided by reason and morality rather than cruelty. In the modern era, punishment takes many forms beyond imprisonment. Fines, community service, restorative justice programs, and rehabilitation are widely used. Criminal behavior is understood in context, psychology, social factors, and opportunity all influence actions. This understanding allows for tailored solutions that protect society while offering offenders a chance to learn and improve. Even today, the specter of past cruelty lingers in our collective memory. Stories of torture chambers, racks, public executions, and dungeons remain cautionary tales. They remind us how far humanity has come and why the principles of fairness, proportion, and human dignity are so important. Imagine now the quiet of a modern city at night. Streetlights glow softly, reflecting off wet cobblestones or asphalt. The hum of life is gentle, unhurried. Courthouses stand quietly, their doors closed for the night. Prisons are calm, structured, and orderly. The echoes of cruelty from centuries past fade into memory, replaced by reason, reflection, and careful administration of justice. Even in a world where laws are enforced, compassion, fairness, and respect guide each action. Let your thoughts drift over these streets, past courts and dungeons, past the public squares of medieval towns, and into a serene understanding. Humanity has learned to balance law with mercy, order with dignity, and punishment with purpose. As you lie quietly, let the story of history carry you gently toward rest. Remember that cruelty, once so central to law, is now tempered by reason. Understand that justice, at its best, seeks restoration, education, and protection. Reflect on the journey from the harsh punishments of ancient civilizations to the measured systems of modern society. Allow these lessons to settle in your mind, a soft rhythm that mirrors the passing of centuries, and know that even the darkest aspects of history have contributed to a world where fairness, dignity, and moral reflection guide justice. And now, as the world outside your window rests, let your thoughts drift softly along the currents of time, the rivers of ancient India, the plazas of Rome, the dungeons of medieval Europe, the grand courts of monarchs, and the quiet modern cities all fade gently into night. Feel the weight of history dissolve, leaving only calm, reflection, and understanding. Breathing slowly, softly, allow sleep to envelop you as you drift through the centuries with gentle awareness of how humanity has learned, slowly, that cruelty need not rule justice. Sleep now, dear listener, and let the quiet lessons of history guide your dreams. Through calm streets, peaceful squares, and serene corridors of justice. Good night.